Okay, because of popular demand,
Today, I'm making a stormtrooper helmet. For this build, I used floor mat foam, craft foam, half-cylinder foam, coffee foam. I like foam in my coffee.
hot glue, super glue,
Contact cement, fast dry sealant, tinted plastic of some kind,
sanding equipment, safety gear.
scissors, razor pens, and a box cutter.
First, I made a dome template and traced it onto white EVA foam.
This dome template is linked in the video description. The full template will be available as soon as I can scan it in.
After tracing the templates, I cut them out using a sharpened box cutter.
Or scissors or razor pen. Box cutter. Becoming a nervous tick. A lot of cutting tools will work, but the important thing is to keep your knife blade sharp using a knife sharpener. Sharpender? Yeah, I'm a sharpender. I sharpen. I love sharpentry because foam dulls out the blade with each cut, and there's no need to go through an entire pack of blades on every single project. I'm using white EVA foam for this build solely so that I can skip the painting process. EVA foam is notoriously difficult to paint, so if you can get a hold of the foam that's the same color as your final product is meant to be, then you can save yourself days, even weeks of painting. It's the only way I can get a video out on time. I sanded the edges smooth on my belt sander, but a rotary tool will also work.
I heat formed the pieces,
Which you have to do carefully because the heat gun gets hot enough to burn the foam, which is very difficult to disguise when you're working with white EVA foam. Also, you could burn yourself. That's just probably should have been at the forefront of that warning. Note to self: people more important than things. But I love things so much.
and stuck them in circular braces, aka tape rolls, so that they would retain their shape while they cooled. I stuck the parts together using contact cement. Read the label carefully before using. Contact cement's toxic and it's an enormous pain if you're new at it, although it is a superior product to, say, hot glue.
Which I do still use on low stress seams or props that don't have to stand up to heat. I happen to be building this heading into summer, which is traditionally convention season, so contact cement. As I glue, I'm attempting to make sure all the registration marks line up. There's a few millimeters of variation at the base, so I sanded it smooth, again on the belt sander. You can get away with them being a little bit off, but try to get them as close as possible.
Once the dome parts are assembled and the glue has had a day to dry, I reheated it with my heat gun to get out all those lumps.
Next, I cut the brim and repeated the heat forming and contact cementing process. It's a little easier this time because it only has to be curved along one axis. It doesn't have to be dished all the way. When it was together and the glue had had a chance to air out, I smeared some fast dry on it, the seams that is, in order to erase the seams. You could wait until the very end to do all the seams at once, but I find that ends up adding a couple hours, even a couple days to the build time because some seams sell seashells by the seashore will need more layers than others. So I like to start as soon as the seam is finished or right before I have to take a 30-minute break to eat or sleep or some other nonsense because that's about the dry time of fast dry sealant. Some seams, however, are going to get covered up by more foam.
I heat formed that and stuck it in my atomic wastebasket to cool.
In fact, I'll have to add a half strip of black on top of it later. But right now, I've just built a basic bad guy helmet. From here you could go snowtrooper, AT-AT driver, generic background Imperial, but today we're going full Stormtrooper, so let's add a faceplate.
That band exists on most of the Stormtrooper helmet variants, but it's usually black. I also used my last Stormtrooper helmet visor template as a rough map to figure out the eye placement of this helmet.
I know it looks kind of funny right now, but that's mainly structural. Gonna get covered up. I just need a surface to stick stuff to. And now for crazy swoopy face parts. This is the most complicated part of the build. This is going to require intense geometric precision, so bring me my most over-the-top compass, stolen from past Jake lest he acquire the secrets of time travel and stop the production of the Star Wars Christmas special.
My compass! It's gone!
Curse you, future Jake! Say what you want about it, we wouldn't have had Boba Fett's disintegrator.
And then wrap the band around that seam. Next, I made this secondary goggle frame out of scrap EVA sheets.
Once I figured out those crazy shapes, I traced them onto 4mm craft foam and flipped them for symmetry. I cut those out and heat formed them. 4mm craft foam is a lot more malleable than the thick stuff, so it will be easier to shape and take less time to heat up. I glued those pieces together with super glue, which is a lot less of a hassle to work with than contact cement because you don't have to pay as close attention to things like ventilation, but it's not quite as flexible, so I wouldn't use it on the main dome seams. Any cosmetic details though, you'll be fine. The vent baffles are gray, so I'm just gonna cut those up from a strip of gray floor mat foam. I made those into strips about an inch long and then glued them to the inside of the space between the, bridge of the nose and upper lip, the mustache, if you will. Can't unsee it now. It's not pretty from the inside, but looks fine from the outside. So I've been trying to make this work, but the Stormtrooper is so iconic that it's just reading as a flaw. So instead, I'm just gonna rip out this brim and replace it. And it means I'll have to do a little bit more putty later, but it'll end up looking 1,000 times better. So I cut it off and made a new one. To get the side vent holes to come out right, I had to add a shim and cut into the face of it. Then, because this blade's nearing the end of its life, I had to sand that rough cut smooth with my rotary tool. Then I spread more putty over the bridge of the nose and under the goggle frames. Now I'm going to move on to the brim. I'm using 4mm roll foam here because I need enough surface area to go all the way around the exterior of the helmet. It wants to roll in on itself, so I weighted it down with 123 machinist blocks, but you could also use machinist L brackets or machinist block offcuts. I may have robbed a machinist. You know, whatever works. When it was good and secure, I drew a curved strip onto the foam to go around the rim. This is only half of it though. I'm sort of doing a longer, skinnier version of the center of the helmet dome from earlier, if that helps you visualize it. When they were both cut out, I heat formed them and then cemented them together. So the original Stormtrooper helmets were vacuum formed, a process where a sheet of hot plastic is stretched over a solid sculpture over a surface that's essentially a reverse air hockey table. All the air is sucked out and the plastic is pulled tight against the model. And while I do have a vacuum former, it occurs to me that maybe not everybody in my audience does. Not to mention I think this helmet is a little too big for my vacuum former. At any rate, this technique is a bit more inclusive. While they are out, I worked on the mid section of the brim. I cut a strip from the roll foam 4 inches wide, although later refined it to 3 inches. Trial and error and all that. Then I rounded off the ends from the earpieces on the sides of the helmet. I super glued that to one side and then wrapped it around the other. Okay, that curved piece from before is still airing out, so I'm going to do the vent details while I wait. So we have a vent on a stick, or rather foam on a stick. This needs to have a slight curve in it and also vent slits. I think in the movies they were stickers. You can also draw them on, but that could fade over time. So I'm going to experiment here by cutting the slits with a razor pen and then heating up the foam and then watching them appear before my very eyes. That bit of dialogue was narrated by Byron Orpheus. And then, vents accomplished. I love it when an experiment actually works. Then I made a structural piece for the inside so that it would hold its shape and not try and deform, like so many of my earlier helmets. I stopped doing the rigid internal support structures because those would inevitably get crushed by baggage handlers. But without the supports, the helmets would deform on their own, just expand back out. So the compromise is to leave the supports in there, but make them out of foam, or cut up wire coat hangers. For the black speaker detail, I wanted to do something different that involves less sanding, so I cut a large foam cylinder in half and then wrapped smaller half cylinders around it, stacking them one on top of the other. For the center one, I cut one of those strips into a quarter strip, just that it would nestle securely within the groove, not resting on top of it. I trimmed the edges and then glued it in place. Then I glued the black strap to the top of the brow, and by this point the curved part of the brim had aired out enough to work with safely, so I brought it back in and glued it to the helmet. The strip just above it forms a convenient corner for it to nestle into, while simultaneously making it more durable and hiding a seam. However, I did still have to cover that seam with putty, so it's kind of moot. That edge is supposed to be rounded. All the edges are rounded on the Stormtrooper helmet because originally they were all vacuum formed, and in order for the form to be released from the model, the edges have to be curved. I know entirely too much about vacuum forming. Any overhang is going to cause so much trouble. That's one hassle you won't have to deal with when working with foam. Once it was on, I noticed that I had a little bit extra, which I'm okay with. Better to have too much than not enough. So I chopped those off, then I carved off the excess brim. Normally I'd sand that smooth, but I think I found a workaround. More on that in a minute. First, I need to finish the ear details. They consist of squares and rectangles. I glued them to the side and then folded them underneath. Then I covered the rough seam from before with another half-cylinder EVA foam strip. I'm going to save the excess for that little bit later, once I know exactly how the shape of the side tubes is going to look. Now that that's finished, I moved on to the front side tubes. I traced this shape onto foam, flipped it to get the reverse, and cut them both out. Then I heat formed them. They have darts in one end, forming this crazy cockatiel shape to help with the curve, making them even more spherical. That's opposite from what I did with my Clone Trooper helmet build because it's harder to hide seams when they're in front. Try not to stretch the edges of the darts, otherwise they won't line up right when they're glued together. When the glue dried, I filled in the seams. Then I glued them to the mask. I glued the longer edge underneath the mask and the shorter one on top. Before filling in the gap, I put foam stoppers inside the nozzles. Then I made the last tube sections. I inserted them and carefully glued them in place. Now that they were in place, I could glue the final segments of black foam strip. I glued in thin crescent moon shaped strips of white craft foam into the eye holes to get a more accurate eye shape, which is kind of crazy because the way they are in the movies, the eyes are too far apart to actually see straight ahead. I'd love it if they took the helmets off and instead of humans, they were all that Sid the Sloth from Ice Age. They're sloth aliens. Slaylians. Mon calamare! You're not even trying, George. But I think the implication is that there's some kind of Tony Stark HUD screen in there. Then I filled in the new seams with sealant.
So you don't want to put this filler material directly on your skin, as I've done in dozens of videos. Basically, when I learned that, there was a shortage in latex medical gloves. So this is me trying to undo the habit and protect myself from all kinds of horrific chemicals as I do this without wearing a mask. I don't know, it doesn't smell as deadly as contact cement, and that's how he died.
When the last application of sealant was dry, I added intake filters inset into the tubes. They're made of pipe scraps and 3D print support mesh. Then I put lenses in the eye holes. And that's how to make a Stormtrooper helmet. Now you can hunt down rebel scum wherever it may be.
Don't trust her, Gaia. She's a Cylon.
Die, Federation scum.
Do I have time to do a trick shot?
Hey, thanks for watching, everyone. I am elated. This is my elated face. I am so glad to finally have built this helmet. It's been on my list for a long time, and it's all thanks to my patrons who make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining them and supporting the channel, you can check out the links in the description down below. Anything pledged goes towards improving video quality, shop equipment, and allows me to put together bigger and more exciting projects for you to enjoy. Be sure to hit that bell icon to be notified of future builds, and in the meantime, you can check out some of my past builds right here. And let me know what your favorite Star Wars helmet is in comments down below.
All right, happy crafting.
See you later.